What I'm about to share with you has never been laid out with the clarity it truly deserves. Not the comfortable version. Not the version with the rough edges filed down. The raw, unfiltered account of what happened to Lynette Hooker, a woman who spent years building toward a dream, finally reached it, and stepped directly into a trap set by the man who had been planning her death long before she ever knew it. And here is where this story becomes something you cannot unhear. Lynette's daughter, Carly, sat across from investigators and delivered a statement so precise, so chillingly accurate, so hauntingly predictive that it rewrote the entire meaning of this disappearance in a single breath. 2 years before her mother went missing off the coast of the Bahamas, Lynette's husband Brian Hooker had his fingers locked around her neck, squeezing the air from her body. When it was over, when Lynette had put enough distance between herself and that boat to breathe again, she fled to Florida. Brian Hooker did not beg. He did not break down. He issued a statement that was not rage and was not desperation. It was a detailed plan. He told her, "I will end your life and drop what's left of you into the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere so remote that no forensic team on Earth will ever locate you." 2 years after that warning, Lynette Hooker vanished into the ocean. So tell me this. Why did his exact words become her exact fate? What are federal agents pulling from the hull of a seized yacht now docked in Fort Pierce? And who was on that second boat? The one anchored right beside them that night. And why have they said nothing? Every one of those answers is coming. But before we get there, hit subscribe right now and tap that like button because what follows is going to require your complete and undivided attention. The sun has already gone under. The sky above the Bahamas carries the color of something bruised. Out in the remote, quiet stretch of water known as Aunt Pat's Bay, a 46-foot luxury sailing vessel called the Soulmate sits at anchor. That name, given everything we now know about what happened aboard it, is almost painful to say aloud. This is where Brian and Lynette Hooker had been living their lives, a floating existence documented for thousands of YouTube followers who watched with open admiration and quiet envy. But on April 4th, no cameras are rolling. According to Brian Hooker, according to the version of events he presented to authorities, here is what took place. At 7:30 in the evening, he and Lynette climbed into their small 8-foot dinghy and pushed off from the Soulmate. Without any warning, the water changed. Waves rose. The vessel pitched. Lynette lost her balance, fell over the side, and as she went into the water, the dinghy keys went with her, disappearing instantly into the dark below. The motor cut out. Brian was left stranded, powerless, watching his wife vanish into the night. He could not swim after her. He could not restart the engine. That is the story he told. Now, let's take it apart. The water in Aunt Pat's Bay, at the precise coordinates where Brian claims Lynette was lost beyond all hope of rescue, is shallow. Not deep water shallow. Not ambiguously shallow. Stand-up shallow. The kind of depth where a panicking adult can put both feet flat on the sandy bottom and lift their face clean above the surface. Brian did not step out of the boat. He did not dive in. He did not shout across the water to the other vessels visible in that anchorage. He did not fire flare. He did not reach for a radio. He did not flag down a single neighboring boat. Instead, Brian Hooker paddled toward shore. Slowly, quietly. It took him 8 hours. He reached land at 4 in the morning. 8 hours is not a man in shock. 8 hours is a man with something else to do first. When Brian eventually reported Lynette missing, a search was launched. It ran for 3 hours. Then it ended. Brian returned to the Soulmate, to the boat where Lynette's belongings still hung in the cabin, where her presence was still written into every corner of that vessel, and he sat down. For 24 hours. No calls to her family. No desperate pleas to the boats still anchored nearby. No cries across the water at first light. Just stillness. Just a man sitting quietly on a boat while somewhere in that warm, shallow bay, his wife was either drifting or already gone. You tell me what that looks like. To understand the full weight of what happened on that water, you have to understand what was happening inside that boat, behind the lens, below deck, in the parts of their life that never made it to YouTube. Browse the Sailing Hookers channel, and what you see is paradise. Open water. White canvas catching wind. Two people somewhere between adventure and a new chapter, soaking in the kind of life most people only fantasize about between meetings. But the soulmate was not something Brian had built. It was Lynette's. She had saved for it. She had planned every detail. She had researched ports of call, learned how to provision for long passages, and laid the financial groundwork that made that boat a reality. The soulmate was Lynette's reward, the thing waiting at the far end of decades of hard work. Her independence, her horizon, her life finally turning towards something entirely her own. Brian came along with it. Carly knew who Brian actually was. She describes her stepfather as a man who operated on two completely different frequencies. To people on the outside, marina neighbors, fellow sailors, anyone who met him at a dock, Brian Hooker was warm and approachable and easy to be around. Inside that cabin, he was something else entirely. Controlling, volatile, a man whose hold over Lynette's freedom tightened with every mile they put between themselves and the rest of the world. And when alcohol entered the picture, the word explosive does not come close to capturing it. 2 years before Lynette's disappearance, something happened that went far beyond a disagreement. Brian Hooker put both hands around Lynette's throat and choked her. In the aftermath, Lynette left. She went to Florida. She told people what had happened. She gave herself space to think. And from across that distance, Brian Hooker reached out. Not with regret, not with remorse, but with a declaration. I will kill you and throw your body into the Atlantic where no investigator will ever find it. He did not say he might. He said he would. He specified the ocean, not as an emotional outburst, but as a chosen location. He mentioned forensic investigators because he had already thought through what comes after. That is not the language of a man losing control. That is the language of a man making a plan. And Lynette, as so many survivors do, went back to the boat. Fast forward to Aunt Pat's Bay. Search teams are working the water. Divers are beneath the surface. Brian Hooker watches from the deck of the Soulmate. To someone standing far enough away, there are moments that could be read as grief, a hand raised to cover his face, eyes cast downward, a posture that resembles devastation from a distance. But up close, Brian Hooker is a man in waiting mode. Waiting for the teams to reach their conclusion. Waiting for equipment to be packed away. Waiting for the ocean to finish doing what he apparently designed it to do. A man's wife goes overboard in water shallow enough to stand in. He takes 8 hours to reach shore. A 3-hour search is conducted. Then he returns to the boat and sits in complete silence for an entire day. You tell me whether that is traumatic shock or something else entirely. Drop your theory in the comments. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now, because what comes next involves the federal government. Bahamian law enforcement sat across from Brian Hooker and listened to his account of that night. They were not persuaded, not even marginally. Local authorities arrested Brian and brought him back to the scene in handcuffs to physically walk through his version of events on the water. Midway through that reconstruction, Brian went over the side of the boat. He hurt his knee. The people watching from shore were not moved. The prevailing view was that this was a performance, a man who had rehearsed helplessness and was now staging it one final time. But without a body, without physical evidence, Brian Hooker was released. He boarded a flight to Michigan. What Brian did not know was that American federal authorities had already been watching. When Brian arranged for a private captain to quietly move the Soulmate out of the Bahamas and into Florida, he handed investigators exactly what they needed. Air Station Miami began tracking the Soulmate's movement across open water in real time. Every mile, every heading change, every deviation from course. Roughly 40 miles off the Florida coastline near Melbourne, the United States Coast Guard made their move. They intercepted the Soulmate on open water. And then, as though the vessel itself had decided to stop running, the engine died completely. Dead in the water. The Soulmate was taken under tow and brought into Fort Pierce like a ghost ship, silent, massive, carrying the weight of everything that had happened inside it. Before the tow lines were even released, the Coast Guard had the yacht wrapped in yellow crime scene tape. What investigators recovered from that boat reshaped everything. The GPS chart plotters. The satellite positioning systems. The vessel's complete electronic navigation record. A precise digital log of every position, Every speed, every heading adjustment, every movement the Soulmate made across days and nights of open water. When that data was placed against Brian Hooker's account of April 4th, his story did not waver under pressure. It collapsed entirely. The claim that he had drifted helplessly for 8 hours, carried by wind and current, was directly contradicted by an electronic record that showed something deliberate, something measured, the kind of movement pattern that belongs to a man following a plan rather than surrendering to the sea. And then came the information from below deck. Sources connected to the investigation indicated that the interior of the Soulmate showed signs of chemical cleaning, not the ordinary wear of a vessel that has lived on salt water, but the targeted, thorough kind of cleanup that suggests someone needed something removed before anyone came looking. Then came the detail that took apart the last remaining piece of Brian's account. Alongside the Soulmate in those quiet, isolated waters on the exact night Lynette disappeared, Brian's entire version of events rested on the assumption that he and Lynette were alone out there. They were not. Someone was on that second boat. Someone who was present for the sounds and the lights and the movements on the Soulmate after 7:30 p.m. on April 4th. Someone close enough to know exactly what happened that night. And they have not said a word.
Who were they?
A couple with no connection to any of this, sitting on a decision that could change everything? Someone who witnessed exactly what happened and is still calculating the cost of speaking up. Tell me in the comments, because I believe the answer to that question determines how this case ultimately ends. Brian Hooker is in Michigan. He is free. No body murder cases are among the most difficult prosecutions in criminal law. Defense attorneys build entire strategies around what is absent. Brian understands this. But here is what the evidence understands. A documented history of strangulation, which remains the single strongest statistical predictor of future homicide within an intimate relationship. A specific, detailed verbal threat to dispose of a body in the ocean, delivered 2 years before that precise scenario played out in real life. An 8-hour timeline that no innocent person has ever been able to credibly explain. A 24-hour silence that no grieving spouse has ever justified. Vessel telemetry data that directly contradicts the alibi, because GPS coordinates do not panic, do not mourn, and do not lie. A forensic examination still processing evidence from a boat sitting in federal custody. An unidentified witness vessel that was present that night and has still not come forward. Stack all of that. That is not a case built on uncertainty. That is a circumstantial case being constructed with patience, precision, and the kind of evidence that does not fade with time. Carly is not waiting. She has severed all contact with Brian Hooker. She has spoken with investigators. She refused to let the ocean be the final chapter of her mother's story. And somewhere in a Florida impound facility, the Soulmate sits. 46 feet of sailing vessel that was supposed to be Lynette's dream, now wrapped from bow to stern in crime scene tape. The teak is drying out. The hull has lost its white. The name painted on the stern, Soulmate, is fading under the coastal sun. It is no longer a boat. It is evidence. Brian Hooker believed the ocean would protect him, but the ocean gave up his GPS records. It gave up his satellite data. It gave up the telemetry that traced his every movement with a precision no alibi can outlast. Lynette Hooker has not been found, but she has not been left behind. And the digital record of what happened on April 4th is more permanent than any current, more patient than any prosecutor, and more dangerous to Brian Hooker than anything the ocean was ever supposed to carry away.